Next, from Chicago, our contributing correspondent Jeff Berkowitz goes one-on-one with Collin Hitt, a policy analyst with the Illinois Policy Institute. We'll hear how far in debt the pension system is, what reforms are being considered, and what's at stake for the state should the pension system continue to rack up billions of dollars in unfunded obligations. This runs about 25 minutes.
You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game, and we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest Collin Hitt. He is from the Illinois Policy Institute. He is the Senior Government Affairs, whatever, I've screwed up that whole title.
That's
What's
right.
your title?
Senior Director of Government Affairs.
Senior
Yes.
Director of Government Affairs.
Yeah.
How long have you been with the Policy Institute?
About 6.5 years.
Okay. What's your background before?
Well, before that, I did a little public policy work at Southern Illinois University, my alma mater, at the Policy Institute that's now named after Paul Simon, the late U.S. Senator.
So we're talking about pensions. The whole state is talking about pensions. We're taping this show on May 8th, 2012. There are a lot of people who think that the legislature needs to come up with some comprehensive solution by the end of May. If they don't, it gets a little trickier politically in terms of to pass things at that point. You don't just need a majority, you need a 60% vote, right?
Right.
And so things that you may not require a lot of Republicans to join, the Democrats could do, you might need to have more Republican involvement. But, you know, when people are thinking about this and they're saying, oh, their eyes start glazing over when you're talking about pensions, why should, you know, people watching this show, why should they really care? I mean, they'd say, oh, look, it's the state employees, okay, they got problems. Why does Joe Sixpack, who's sitting there watching this show,
Sure.
enjoying it, he switched off the baseball game to hear from Collin Hitt what's this about? How does that affect Joe Sixpack?
Well, Joe Sixpack just saw his income taxes go up by a record amount across Illinois. And almost all of that new money he's sending to Springfield are going towards the retirement benefits of public employees. He's not getting better roads. He's not getting safer neighborhoods. His kids aren't going to get cheaper college. All of his investment in that tax hike is going towards the retirement benefit of government employees.
So if he say he's married and say he had $50,000 in income, his wife or spouse $50,000,
Right.
they're jointly making $100,000 in income.
Right.
They had been paying roughly a state income tax of 3% individual, about $3,000. It's a little bit less for exemptions.
Right. So he's paying $2,000 more per year.
And you're saying he's not getting anything for that $2,000?
All of that is going, or almost all of that, is going to retirement costs for government employees.
And so, so that was about a $5 billion payment that we had, right? The
Well,
most recent payment
out
of
of it-
the 2012 budget?
Right, and you can talk about this in
For
budget
pension.
terms, you know, of course. And this is where people can tune out, but this is what's important. Out of a $33 billion budget, the state of Illinois is going to spend about $7.5 billion on retirement costs this year. That's $5 billion on a pension payment, about $1.5 billion on pension bond repayments, and another $1 billion on health insurance for government retirees. $7.5 billion out of a $33 billion budget.
So almost talking, people were saying 16%, it's almost talking like 25%, right?
It's very
It's
high.
pushing that.
That's right.
And the point is it's crowding out other
Well-
expenditures. So people might say, well, the state needs to spend more on education. They'll have to spend less on education to cover the pension payment. They'll have to spend less on Medicaid. These may be more worthy, it's hard to say what's more worthy, but they may be more worthy objectives, but there's no choice because the pension payments have to be met, or do they?
State
Could
government.
we just default?
Well, I think that would be an untenable situation. I mean, default on pension debt means that we're bouncing checks to retired teachers, right? Nobody wants to be in that kind of situation.
We're just saying we can't, because you do have pension systems that go broke in the private sector.
Right.
And the people, to some extent, it's insured. The government steps in and insures that.
Well, on paper, our pensions are already broke. We can see that in Illinois. They're hemorrhaging money.
They're underfunded? How much are they underfunded?
They're underfunded.
By
By
how much?
$83 billion officially.
Okay.
The state has to come up with $83 billion over the next 30 or so years that it doesn't have in order to get back to even with our pension systems. And it's just an absolutely insurmountable debt. And then there's another $54 billion that it would have to come up with to meet its current obligations for retiree health insurance as well. It's an impossible situation budget-wise.
So you can't meet all those obligations. The math just doesn't add up.
The
And
math
you
doesn't-
have to adjust your obligations downward you have to adjust the contributions of the employees
Well,
and the retirees
You,
upward.
you brought
Is that
up
right?
you brought up an important point earlier. We were talking about Joe Sixpack, but he's also probably got a teacher that lives somewhere on his block or in his family, and she's hearing now from her pension fund, the teacher retirement system. There's a possibility, there's at least a possibility, that in 15 years they could be out of money. And that's what you mean by default. Right now, the systems are in terrible financial shape, but there's a possibility within our lifetimes that we could see these funds start to bounce checks. And that's a situation that we should look to avoid as well. We've got to cut taxes in Illinois. We've got to have a balanced budget if we want to have an economic recovery.
You've got to cut taxes?
Absolutely. Taxes have to be lower in Illinois than they have now. They certainly can't go up, right? All right, but second of all, we have to be in a situation where we stabilize the finances of our retirement systems, because it's just a morally untenable situation to say that one day we're going to be bouncing checks to thousands of public employees. Of course, the trade-off there is that a lot of those employees are going to have to accept that the benefits that they thought that they might be able to earn going forward, the health insurance benefits that that some people currently have, are just simply too generous for taxpayers to afford.
But doesn't the Constitution, the Illinois Constitution, say that, I think this is Article 13, Section 5 of the Illinois Constitution, that membership in any pension or retirement system of the state, any unit of local government or school district, or any agency or instrumentality thereof, shall be an enforceable contract, actually an enforceable contractual relationship, the benefits of which shall not be diminished or impaired. The benefits of which shall not be diminished or impaired. Are you violating the Constitution when you, Collin Hitt, from the Illinois Policy Institute, say that you think that those benefits should be diminished, should be impaired?
I'm not saying that those benefits should be diminished or impaired at all.
You're not?
No. The benefits that have already been earned can be honored if we accept a benefit system going forward that's affordable. There's 4 ways that the state of Illinois can save money. One, that's by saying, look, public employee, you've earned a certain amount of money to date. Your pension is going to look like this. We're going to leave that in place as you currently understand it, for the most part. Just as if you'd left public employment and wanted to collect your pension since you're already vested. Okay, but going forward, the system of benefits we're going to have is going to be affordable, because right now it's clearly not. We can't save enough in real time to fund these benefits at the time of retirement. The Civic Committee of the Commercial Club of Chicago had come up with a proposal that would accomplish this. Other
That would
folks
do what?
that would accomplish something like that.
What is
that
their
would
proposal?
Be affordable.
What is their proposal?
Well, what they proposed to do, it said if you want to keep your current pension and you want to keep earning towards your pension, you're going to have to contribute significantly more. To give you an example of how
Isn't that the
generous
same as
pensions are.
diminishing their benefits, though? Because you're saying if you want to keep your benefits the same, you're being held up in a sense. They could argue you have to pay more. So if you don't pay more, then we're going to cut your benefits.
But that wasn't for benefits that had already been earned to date. That was if
But
you want
these
to
are
keep
current-
adding to your retirement savings.
But these are current employees,
Right.
and your point is those benefits had not accrued yet. That's what you can cut. You're saying future benefits that had not accrued. Right. Other people say, no, you can't cut anything of current employees, new employees.
Right.
They differ with you on the interpretation
Benefits
of the
not
Constitution.
yet accrued cannot be constitutionally protected. They don't exist. They literally don't exist right now. It's just as if somebody had left government.
Well, they exist in the sense that people are projecting that they will earn a certain amount of money and they will have certain pension benefits to come from those earnings in the future.
That's an
You're
extreme
saying,
reading. That's an extreme reading of the clause that you just put out there.
But you're not a lawyer. You're not a lawyer.
But I'll give
you don't have a law degree,
right?
right?
You'll give
Let's
you
be
another
fair here.
example.
You're relying on other lawyers, right?
Right, like most people do.
Okay. But there is a difference of opinion among lawyers.
Of course there is.
Some people who are bright study this and say the Illinois Constitution means what I've just said. You can't impair these
Right.
benefits. You cannot do what you want to do. Other lawyers make the arguments you just made.
And I've read those arguments as well. Now here's an extreme of this, but this is a real situation. If the state keeps trying to honor its exploding pension costs, it's going to have to fire some people. It's going to have to lay off public employees. And if you go to a public employee and say, I have to fire you because we don't have enough money to keep you on board, that employee could say, well, wait a second, that's impairing my pension. You're not allowing me to continue to earn towards my pension just like I thought. So therefore, my very employment is protected by this pension clause. That's an extreme continuation.
And
of
putting
that,
aside the constitutionality of it, you think people would rather have a job, even though they're earning somewhat less in terms of pension benefits, they're at least employed, as opposed to be unemployed. It's Milton Friedman used to always, people say I shouldn't keep quoting Milton Friedman, but he's so easy to quote.
Right.
Because when he would talk about minimum wages, he would say, I don't understand, and this is a Nobel Prize laureate in economics. He said, if you have a minimum wage, people, yes, if they get a job, they will have a higher wage, but you know, as the wage goes above the market wage, the demand for that labor falls off, the supply increases, you create unemployment. So Milton Friedman would say, how is somebody better off unemployed at a higher wage than employed at a lower wage? And in a sense, you're making the same argument, not about minimum wages, but you're saying when you artificially raise the cost of employing this person, there's not enough to pay that person. His marginal productivity doesn't support that. That person will lose his job, and so he's not better off. If he had the job, he would be better off, but he's not going to have a job. That's your point. It's sort of a long-winded way of saying that. Long-winded on my part.
When Milton Friedman was talking about the minimum wage, he was talking about the impact on private sector, right? The government in Illinois is just coming to grips with the world of finite resources.
Well, that's the government, in a sense, is not immune from the same forces that affect the private sector.
Which it's now learning.
So if they only have a certain amount of funds that the government, that taxpayers are willing to give them,
right.
And if you raise the costs of an individual employee,
right.
They have to hire fewer employees. So you're right, it's the government sector, but the government is not immune from market forces.
Of course not. Of course not. But it doesn't. Anyway.
Anyway, that's a side point.
That is a side point.
That'll be when you go back to school. Where'd you have an undergraduate degree?
Southern Illinois University.
Okay. So when you go back, and that's in political science?
And philosophy.
You might be going back to get a PhD sometime. That could be your dissertation in economics, right?
Yeah, we could focus on that maybe.
Okay.
But,
and John Tillman would fund that bit from the Illinois Policy Institute, right, John?
That is a fantastic idea.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, or any other number of things.
Okay.
That would be great for me. But no, but back in terms of the issue of pensions, and that is, look at the higher education budget for the state of Illinois, and this is a sign of things to come across the board. The state spends roughly $2 billion a year on higher education. That's appropriations to universities, that's tuition assistance to kids, some other special programs, and then the retirement costs for university employees, both in terms of health insurance and their public pensions. The state government pays those, not the universities themselves, state government. Okay, we're to the moment this year probably, and if not this year, within the next couple of years, where retirement costs is going to be a majority of the state's higher education budget. A majority. We're going to be spending more on retirement costs than we do on everything else in higher education combined. A similar day is coming for suburban and downstate education funding. Chicago's a little bit different, but to the point where we're going to be paying more to the teachers' retirement system and to the teachers' retirement insurance program than we are for everything else that we spend on public education.
We're crowding out improvements in education for students and the public schools in the K through 12 level because we're paying retirees such enormous pensions, and we're keeping our word to pay those pensions. And we know that incentives were set up wrongly before because local school boards would generously award high salaries because the pensions of those school teachers and administrators were set based on the 4 highest years of their salaries. So they would jack up the salaries, the pensions would go up, and they'd say, but we don't pay it, the state pays it.
Well, and
we being the taxpayers in Winnetka, the taxpayers in Skokie, the taxpayers in Naperville, those individual units didn't pay, so there was every incentive to reward their friends who were the teachers,
right,
and say, but you local taxpayers, we're not going to raise your property taxes. Now, they could have said somebody else is going to have to because somebody else in the state pays it, and so out of the state taxes it comes. But my point is, that whole system, the incentives were wrong, and now people are saying that's one of the corrections they want. They want to shift the cost back to these pensions, to the people who are making the decisions. So if you want to give big pensions to teachers and people in Naperville. People in Naperville should pay, right?
Or small teachers in order to clear way.
Or anybody. So
small
you
pensions
would
for
say the Illinois Policy
property tax
Institute
relief.
is on board with that legislation that would shift it back, and isn't that what Speaker Mike Madigan is trying
Well,
to do?
we haven't
Others?
seen legislation yet.
But he has suggested
let's-
that,
let's-
hasn't he?
well,
Has he
yeah.
suggested that?
Of
Or
course.
is it President John Colleton? Am I getting confused here?
They
Perhaps
both, they
both.
both, yeah, they both have to a sense. You
Okay.
know, the Speaker Madigan's being more coy, but anyway.
Well, what does the Illinois Policy Institute say? Do they support that? I thought they did.
We do.
John Tillman and
Yes.
you, Collin Hitt,
Yes.
and the whole Policy Institute.
Look,
Christina Rasmussen.
The
whole thing.
decision of state government to underwrite the costs of every school district except Chicago's pensions has had enormous and now dire consequences on state finances. Half of the state's pension debt, half of its yearly costs on pensions go towards the teacher retirement costs.
We've got about 15 minutes left for this show. So I'm going to say in that 15 minutes, let's see if we can solve the problems.
Okay.
Let's just sort of recap here. I mean, first, you know, the players, the pension players here, what I call the pols, are the politicians, okay? Senate President John Cullerton, Speaker Mike Madigan, both Democrats. Right. The Republican minority leader in the Senate, Christine Radogno, and the
Right.
Republican House leader, Tom Cross, Governor Pat Quinn. These folks have, and Governor Pat Quinn has a significant proposal, which sounded like Bill Brady's probably laughing, because when Bill Brady, the Republican, was running against Pat Quinn, the Democrat, for governor, I think Governor Quinn was saying he wouldn't do any of these things, and now he's adopting basically the plan of then wannabe Governor Bill Brady. So the political, what I'm saying is not to be political like Governor Quinn is doing something wrong or Brady. I'm saying the parties and their ideas and their philosophies are kind of coming together here, Democrat and Republican, right?
Well, I don't think this is necessarily a philosophical conversion for any of the
practical
newcomers.
conversion.
It's a practical conversion. When you're out of money, you're out of money.
But my point is, so stay with me for a second. The other pension players are the unions. That is the
Right.
employees currently in the workforce and the retirees. These folks have a major interest in what gets decided, partly because their benefits could be cut, but if they're not, their jobs could be cut.
Right.
They don't have a guaranteed job for life. So the unions and the union representatives have an incentive here. Henry Bair from the major public sector union, AFSCME, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, right? And Henry Bair has said on Fox Chicago Sunday just a few days ago, we're taping this on May 8th, he said, look, he said, you're not going to the bondholders and saying they should give up things. Why are you going to the unions and say they should give up things? What would you say to Henry Bair?
Well, to Henry Bair, I'll tell you what I've told Henry Bair in the first place is Henry Bair's favorite line is, the politicians in Springfield spent all the money and they didn't put it into the pension funds.
Right.
But the politicians in Springfield spent money on things that Henry Bair and the heads of the other public employee unions endorsed. They were spending initiatives that expanded payrolls, that expanded salaries.
So you're saying Henry
expanded
was on board
programs.
for that?
Do you
sure?
ever remember
Does Henry
AFSCME standing
agree-
up
does Henry
and issue?
agree with you?
Do you ever remember AFSCME
Yeah.
or the Illinois Education Association issue a press release saying we oppose this additional spending outlay?
Well, they might
for
say they
public
want
employees?
both. Because Henry says now, he says your
Right.
problem is your tax system. Henry says you have a proportional tax. You
That's
need
a
a
joke.
progressive tax.
That's an absolute.
He said if
joke.
you had a progressive, he says it's unfair. He said high-income people, in many cases, are paying 3% as an effective tax rate. And he says low-income people may be paying 15 or 20%.
We just had
Does
the
Bair,
largest,
is Bair right about that?
We just had the largest income tax increase in state history.
Right, and he says you should have gone after the high-income people, the corporations that have loopholes. This is what Henry Bair says. Instead, you've raised it on low-income people. Henry would agree with you.
Raise taxes on absolutely everybody, but our Constitution mandates.
He says
a
change the
flat tax.
Constitution. Change the
Well, you can
Constitution.
try and
amend
put it on the
Okay.
ballot, but
Okay.
the
Okay.
progressive tax isn't working well for
The
California.
point
at
is, I
all.
just want to say, so the pension players, the politicians, the unions, the union employees, the retirees, the service providers, the people who like to sell these services, the teachers who are currently, they're sort of on both. They're a recipient, but they also want to be hired to provide education services. The Medicaid providers, the doctors, they're affected. Their demand for their service is going to be less. The service recipients, the Medicaid recipients, the students in those schools, the taxpayers.
Right.
And so the Civic Committee and others say, let's bring everybody together, let's be reasonable, let's look at the problem, let's figure out what has to be done, and let's do it. Is that what the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club of Chicago is saying, and would you say that's the right thing?
Well, First of all, the Civic Committee was out ahead of this pension issue before a lot of other groups.
Civic Federation too.
Civic Federation
So
as
a
well.
lot, and those are basically business groups made up of large business entities in Chicago and the broader area, and they're Democrats and Republicans.
Sure, and the
They're
Illinois
not
Policy
partisan.
Institute
And
talked
the Illinois
about
Policy
this
Institute.
for a while, but you wouldn't call us a business group.
You would call you a think tank.
A think tank.
Liberty, free market oriented think tank.
A think tank, good government group, taxpayer watchdog,
Okay.
all of those things are accurate.
Along with the Heartland Institute.
Another think
Along
tank.
with the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability of Ralph Martiri. Different view, perhaps,
Wouldn't
but
call them a budget watchdog or a taxpayer.
they would differ with you, and they're a think tank, and we'd like Ralph to come on and talk about these issues. They take a
Absolutely.
different view from you, but you would have to agree they are a think tank. They put out
Sure.
their ideas, right?
Sure.
You put out your ideas.
Absolutely.
And in the marketplace of ideas, the consumers choose,
That's right.
right?
And we're at a moment for choosing right now.
But okay, so those are the players, and we've almost solved this because you say the pension payment factors, the retirement age. You got to raise the retirement age. We don't know how much and at what pace, and we don't know what that does to solve the problem. We'll ask you, but that's a major factor. Employees have to contribute more. Governor Quinn has said raise it from 9% to 12%, with some caveats, right?
Right.
The employee salary adjustment, known as the COLA, cost of living adjustment.
Right.
Sometimes I think it goes up now just at 3%, even no matter what inflation is. We have to do something about it. I think he's saying just cut it out. Daniel Biss was here last week, State Representative Daniel Biss, and said, we should estimate the savings and we should give some of that agree to give some of that to the employees in a lump sum payment. But they're talking about similar things here, maybe doing it differently. So retirement age, employee contribution, employee salary adjustment for figuring out pensions, the COLAs, the retiree health care payments you would bring up and say, that's a major thing. It's not necessarily just part of the pension issue, but if you don't solve that problem, then you got another budget problem. Retirees health care payments.
Right.
Or retiree health care costs are going up faster than the system can handle, so you're going to have to get more contributions from the retirees. The Constitution, we've talked about how that comes into play. The local or state, who pays, whether it's the state or the village. So those are basically the factors. Everybody would agree there's not some hidden pile of money here. Like somebody would say, oh, the corporations should pay as if they've got a bag of money.
Right, absolutely.
Corporations are just shareholders and employees and customers, right?
That's right.
So the point is there agreement? Those factors I've just mentioned, would you say all the players agree that's where those solutions come from? And now the question is, which factors should be more important? Should it be higher employee contributions? Should the COLA be adjusted? So are we just dealing with the parameters now? Everybody's in the game and they know sort of what has to be done. Now they all differ, and they differ in the sense of which factor will be relied on more.
That's kind of the nature of the conversation in Springfield.
Except for
when
the
it comes
unions.
to
Except for the
pensions.
unions. because
Except
the-
for the unions, right.
But even the unions, I think the Illinois Federation of Teachers representative Biss told me, said his proposals, which do require sort of givebacks and modifications, he said the Illinois Federation of Teachers said they're not for it, they're not against it, they're neutral. Would you say that's progress?
Well,
They're not opposing it.
with due respect to Representative Biss's thoughtfulness for his proposals, his aren't on the cusp of passage either. That's really where you see where the unions stand once they think your legislation has a chance of becoming law.
Then they become neutral.
Then they become invested.
Oh.
And I'd be skeptical
What is-
as to whether or not they'd remain neutral. But
So then they oppose it. You're saying they don't have to oppose
We
it now.
haven't seen
That's
position-
your
we haven't
prediction.
seen positions
That's your
from-
prediction, though, that they would oppose it when they saw something on the cusp of passing. Right now, they can afford to be reasonable and say, this is what you're saying, I'm not saying. Right now, you're saying the unions,
we'd
the
really
Illinois
find
Federation of
out.
Teachers.
We'd really find out.
Then you'll
again,
know
if-
what-
then we'll
when
know.
your
And that's
feet are
not
to the
just
fire.
that's just not just about pensions. That's about everything.
Okay.
Your incentive is not to show your hand early in politics.
So before we go to that, just the solution, people say the transition costs, if you wanted to have more, you can have a defined benefit system, you can have a defined contribution. The two major categories or classifications of
Right.
pensions. We have had in the state of Illinois in the public sector, unions, pensions, they have been defined benefit, right?
Right.
In the private sector, most defined benefit plans, too difficult to deal with, too costly, too difficult to manage. They've cut them out, they've replaced them with defined contribution plans, 401k.
Right.
Should some people say when you do that in the outside the private sector, if a government entity, whether it's Social Security or the state system, you have high transition costs, right?
Right.
And the high transition costs are such that you can't do it.
Right.
What do you say?
Well, talk for a second again about the desirability of a defined contribution system. I heard it said well earlier today, and it's worth repeating. If you're in a defined benefit, if you're in a pension system, or if you're putting aside money for retirement, do you want politicians to control money? Do you want state bureaucracy to control money, or do you want to control it yourself? You're crazy right now if you pick one of the first two. So you want to control that money yourself. That's what a 401k, that's what a defined contribution system is. It's desirable, it's predictable, and ultimately
And it fits with the policy and philosophy of John Tillman and the Illinois Policy Institute and Ted Dombrowski and Christina Rasmussen
It fits-
and
it-
Collin
it
Hitt.
fits with the
All of you
financial
folks-
realities.
But all of you folks, you have to admit, are free market oriented, and you like the idea that individuals control things and not some collective entity called the government. Am I right?
Well, we hate the idea that government can make promises and burden future generations with billions and billions of debt. It's what's happening right now in
Plus,
Illinois with
you think
pensions.
individuals make. We're going to the bats here. Drop my bat.
Right.
People, we think better with bats in our hand. See it like that. Don't get scared. That's why the bat's here, so we can think better. So, but that's the point. You folks do believe that individuals make better decisions than governments, and so
Absolutely.
that's a bias. You have to agree. That's a bias.
We are biased on behalf of individuals and families over the decision of government.
And you say here the evidence supports you because you see how the government has botched this pension system so badly. Is that what you would say?
Yes, I would agree with that, Jeff.
Okay, and it's not just in Illinois. Wherever, whether it's the federal government, state government, county, and many other states, not all,
Right.
great majority, they botch these things, right?
Legislatures seem fundamentally poorly suited to running defined benefit
So
programs.
it's a simple thing. Shouldn't you just go toward a defined contribution system? I mean, don't fiddle around with larger contributions. You're not really saying that. You're saying you can cure some of these things, you can fund them better, you can deal with it being underfunded. Isn't that what you're saying?
That is the safest and best way to proceed going forward. It
But
doesn't-
eventually, you'd like to go toward a defined contribution system and get the individuals in control and the government out of
That's
its
what,
business.
that's what I was saying right now. The best way to go forward with current people's benefits and with new employees is to move to a system that's centered on a defined contribution system. Yes.
And the thing is, and John Tillman made this point a lot, the crowd-out phenomenon is a social justice issue here.
Right.
Because it's no longer, are you for more or less government? Now you've got Democrats, on average, favor more government than Republicans, although some Republicans get in there and want more government too. But now you've got Democrats fighting over here saying, okay, if you're liberal and you want more spending, should it go to the pensions, that is the employees or retirees in those unions, or should it go to the people who want more education spending or who want more Medicaid spending? So one constituent group is crowding out the other, and it's almost a social justice. You could say, is it fair that people in ASME get these generous pensions while kids are not learning how to read and write and don't have the appropriate tools? And if we hadn't have these substantial pensions that go to retiree teachers, we could get better, younger, more aggressive, and better trained, better skilled teachers who could teach in low-income areas and do a better job of getting kids to learn how to read and write and do math.
A lot of Republicans tend to think that government can be better run with fewer resources. Democrats like to throw on balance, like to throw more resources at their favorite programs. The fact is, though, we're now a musical accompaniment.
Yeah.
The fact is,
Just to
though,
see if you're on your toes.
Yeah, well, I'm on my toes. The fact is we're now running out of money. Over the last 5 years, about 80% of all new money in education and higher education is going to new retirement costs. Democrats, that's why you're seeing Democrats currently get on board with pension reform. It's eating into their favorite
We're going to
programs.
continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank our guest, Collin Hitt. He is what's your title?
Senior Director of Government Affairs.
And that's in Springfield.
I'm based out of Springfield.
You have offices both in Illinois Policy Institute has Springfield office, Chicago office. It's running on a $4 million budget. Is that what Tillman's got now?
I believe our budget last year was just over $2 million.
Okay, but it's going toward, I think, a $3 million down.
We can all hope so.
And 30 employees or so total. You've grown tremendously in the last 4 or 5 years. The value of free market has gone up. Tillman said this in 2008. We thought that with the election of Obama, people were saying that free market stocks were down. We just say now the free market stocks are now increased in value. Has Obama done that in the 3 years he's been president?
Well, the stakes of the fight over public policy in general couldn't be more clearer than they now are.
And on the
in
pension
Illinois.
side, you're having a tremendous impact, the Illinois
Thank you.
Policy Institute.
Thank you.
But I'm saying that you would agree. It's a fact because your ideas are getting touted or getting discussed. And prior, 3 or 4 years ago, there was a vacuum. These free market ideas weren't getting, they would be in the academy, but they weren't making their way into the state legislature as debating points, right?
Well, now is the time to come forward with these ideas. We've heard it mentioned a bunch. A crisis is a terrible thing to waste.
Taylor in the Reagan Revolution said, if not now.